This structure, 800 yards off the beach of Bimini Island in the Bahamas, may be one of the last visible remaining proofs of the existence of the continent Plato called Atlantis. Structures like this, called megaliths, from mega meaning big and lith meaning stone, are found all over the world. The best known are Stonehenge and Avebury in England, these structures in France, and this one, America's Stonehenge, in New Hampshire. Single stones are called cromlechs. Those with a large capstone supported by several smaller stones are called dolmens. Those built with passages and rooms are called passage chambers. In this program, you'll be seeing evidence for yourself and hearing about it from Dr. David Zink, director of the Institute for Planetary Studies. Dr. Zink has explored the sites and conducted scientific experiments himself to determine whether or not the big stone structures in the Bahamas are man-made or whether they are naturally formed geological features. He will show you and tell you what he found.
Well, the topic, I guess you know the topic. It's my work at Bimini, which began in the first recon in 1974. And through the years, as I've explained what I was doing out there, people ask me how you got so mixed up. What was it that led you into this kind of nonsense? It's a very simple story. 1957, first year at the Air Force Academy faculty, a cadet said to me, "How seriously are we to take Plato's Atlantis?" I said, "I don't know. I'll have to think about that." 1957. By 1966, with the Santorini expedition out of Woods Hole, I figured it was a serious possibility. By 1969, I had run into the Cayce material, and through the years, I have received some support from them, practical support. I was a blue water sailor, a diver, so what the heck. I took my yacht out of Galveston and sailed out there in '74. 6 weeks of recon in the winter, and I felt that we had something to look at. And then followed 9 expeditions up through 1979. So this evening, I would like to share some of the data with you. I mentioned earlier that the clairvoyant or prophet, whatever you wanted to call him, Edgar Cayce, had made a number of statements about Atlantis, and the essential difference between Plato and Cayce is a high-tech environment and a high-tech capability, which in Cayce's account helped them to destroy the world that they had built for themselves. During my research, as you will see in some late slides, there were some hints of a high technology still remaining in place. And so this has predisposed me to at least leave this an open question. It is easy enough with a location, the mid-Atlantic ridge, for nature to have done in the Atlanteans. But both Plato and Cayce said that it was in effect a spiritual and moral failure. In other words, the children of light and the children of darkness got into a bit of a hassle, and the children of darkness won. Some people who have studied the evolution of our own culture feel that we may be working back into that same script. And so that's the point of studying this topic, aside from the scientific curiosity which I've had. Beyond the Straits of Gibraltar was what Plato had in mind, and that's also Cayce's location out in the Atlantic. And the mid-Atlantic ridge, as those of you who've studied the subject know, has exhibited instability. As a matter of fact, Plato talked about the end of Atlantis somewhere around 9,000 BC, plus or minus 700 or 800 years. And we have a volcano on that ridge dated at about that time, Mount Venus. Also, for the serious student of Atlantis, and I would mention only one person that you may not know of, a Soviet chemical engineer, Zirov. He was the most serious student of the topic, and the Canary Islands and the Azores were among his choice locations. The way he did his work, he compiled the oceanography of 15 nations, whatever the language, whatever was relevant in the data, and I admire him the most. And what he described as a prerequisite to getting into this topic was a kind of encyclopedic knowledge. One had to cross discipline boundaries without any problems. In the Canary Islands, as in Plato's legend, for example, there are many parallels, but one of them, a tradition of 10 kings, which was the same as Plato's account of Atlantis. The colors of volcanic stones in the Canaries also match Plato's descriptions. There are about 16 other parallels, but that'll give you an idea of what's there. Ultimately, the Canary Islands and the Azores are my objectives, but I have to have at least 1,800 feet diving capability there. And I haven't come up with that yet. This is a model of a Canary Island archaeological site, suggesting the sophistication of that culture, probably 1,500 years ago, perhaps 2,000. We're concerned tonight with closer to the western side of the Atlantic and in the Bahamas. The site that I have been working on would last have been out of the water about 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, depending on whose data you use. This is one of the students of Atlantis, Dr. Manson Valentine, and as I began my recon, I visited with him for a few days. He is was a Yale zoologist who had problems trying to explain species across the Atlantic. He needed a place in between for diffusion, and so that's what led him to the idea of Atlantis. And it is also a topic full of rumors. By a strange coincidence, this site just north of Andros Island, which got everyone excited in the beginning, has the same proportions and practically the same dimensions as the Temple of the Turtles in Uxmal in the Yucatan. However, when Philippe Cousteau invited me to explain these problems in the Bahamas, and we put the Calypso down near it and swam over it, we found it was what we thought it was, a sponge holding pen, sponge corral. And that's part of the game you get into, too. You get many rumors, many stories. This is the site at Bimini, off North Bimini. The promontory in the lower left corner is Paradise Point. And the site itself, you can see the shape, the reverse J shape, is approximately 600 meters long by 100 meters across. If you'll look to the bottom of that slide, you can see ancient drowned beach lines. The basic argument that I have been presented with to cope with is that shape out 1/2 mile offshore is a natural formation of beach rock. The drowned beach lines you see below do not have the same orientation. Furthermore, there is a line of stones which crosses the beach at about 14 degrees out of alignment, and so about the main site. Here is a closer view of the main site, the two parallel rows of stones to the right, and then the main lead, which goes approximately 1,800 feet to the north. This is looking from the north end of the site to the south. The spot amidst the turtle grass is a freshwater spring. And of course, the ancients always had an interest in having fresh water around their sacred sites. Just above it and slightly to the right, you can see barely a circle of about 60 meters in diameter. That has yet to be investigated. Here is the line of the stones that I told you about that approach the drowned beach lines, and you can see their relationship to the ancient beach. The first major survey of this site, and the only one that's ever been done, was initiated by me in 1975. We found certain geometric relationships, and these geometric relationships led me to pursue ancient astronomical observations, the orientations, without success. The site is basically oriented northeast, however, as is Stonehenge, which led me to the original question. Also, of course, there is some confusion. As you see, there is a 7-degree spread between the two supposedly parallel connections. The bottom of this slide, you can see the kind of arrangements of these blocks which are alleged to be natural beach rock. The Atlanteans had a concern both in Plato and in Cayce with worshiping every 5th and 6th year. As you see to the bottom, the beachward lead, we have 5 large stones, 5 small stones beside them. This motif is found various places on the site. To the upper right-hand corner, you see another problem. In all kinds of attempts to rationalize the data, various earth scientists have argued, for example, that fractures created the joints which don't fit into the beach rock pattern. In that case, at position A on the survey, the blocks cross over a fracture in the seabed, and that fracture does not correspond with the jointing. Partly my argument is morphological. Partly, ultimately, you will see it is trace element patterns. Logically, if these blocks were formed in situ, you would have expected the elements to bleed down. In distinguishing between the blocks and the seafloor, we have 6 or 8 elements absent in the seafloor, which are in the blocks above. So this is a kind of argument against a formation of these blocks in situ. This will give you a scale of some of the smaller blocks. Now this is an anomaly on the site that will give you some sense of the difficulty of studying it. This is in 20 feet of water. It is I can only call it a slot in the seabed about 100 meters long. Not related to any local feature. The left wall about nearly vertical, the right wall about 45 degrees off the vertical, about 40 centimeters across. No explanation whatsoever. You can see the scale from the diver above. This is just a bit to the south of the main site. This is a typical size of the blocks, about 3 by 4 meters, about 12 tons. Now the basic argument is that this is beach rock, and I will proceed with a morphological argument, but I would like to say that beach rock, of course, is a very soft limestone, which when you strike it with a geologist hammer, you get a dull thud. This material, when you strike it with the same hammer, you get a ring like striking iron. It's micrite. It's been through seawater exchanged. It's much harder than it was in the beginning. A fact which leads you to become suspicious, if you think about it, of all carbon-14 dates, because the seawater exchange has constantly rearranged the chemical composition. Ultimately, it could be much older than I've hinted, but I say it has to be at least older than 6,000 BC. You get a lot of jokes out there. I was sponsored for a while by the president of the Bahamian Senate, and she had a report of a Phoenician shipwreck. We dove on the site some miles to the north of the island, and tracking down the manufacture of this safe, we found that the wreck was probably about 1850 to 1860, an island steamer, inter-island steamer. And that's part of this job. You have to sort it out constantly. In our survey, we found several very interesting geometrical patterns, and this is one of them. Through the stone to the left, we had an orientation of 0 degrees magnetic, 45 degrees magnetic to the two small obelisks, and due east to a formation that looked like an arrow. This kind of geometric relationship is certainly not what nature does as it creates natural beach rock. This is the base of those two small obelisks. They go from right to left. This is the arrow stone. It's about 4 meters long. Here is the fracture I was telling you about that does not coincide with the joint of the block above to the left. More detail on that here. I found this fracture within the first week of the first major expedition, so I knew that I had more to look at. Now, this is a typical situation among the larger blocks. A line vertically through the screen would be parallel to the beach line. And then the joint that goes horizontally across it is perpendicular to the beach. And here's a drawing of that. And you see the wider joint is 80 centimeters, the narrow one 10 centimeters. The typical beach rock pattern in the Caribbean is about 70 centimeters where that 10 centimeter joint is, and no joint parallel. And that isn't what we find out there. And the overall orientation of the main site is obliquely pointed towards the beach. It doesn't parallel it. And as you can see from the slide, the former drowned beach lines are all parallel to one another. My reasoning from shapes is morphological in relation to beach rock. So morphologically, they're on thin ground. Beach rock usually formed on a slope. I did this fathometer profile in '74. It's about a half mile across the chart. And where the two arrows are, you have the two parallel leads. Overall, basically, a horizontal piece of seafloor, not a slope. Here's another problem. This is to the east of the island, and you see what looks like a dam near the bottom. You see water flowing over it. Above that line, you have 8 feet of water. Below it, you have 4 feet of water. Here you can see it more clearly. 4 feet of water to the left, 8 to the right. And the current, obviously, pulling the sand around it. Now, if you saw that from an airplane, what would you think it was? You would think it was some sort of dam. However, those patterns are turtle grass. And even though they seem to deflect currents, they're still turtle grass. So what we did was to take an airlift and cut down through them about 12 feet. We reached no stones. So either they are shaped by a chemical pattern or you name it. I have no other explanation. There are no stones to put one's hands on, at least within 12 feet. And that seems extraordinary to reflect a chemical pattern beyond 12 feet in a vertical plane. Now here is a pattern towards the north end of the site. And here is an artifact that we've left in place for people that want to argue that there are no human artifacts. This is a small metate about, I would say, 40 centimeters across. A metate, of course, is what you grind corn in. This is cemented into the seafloor, so we believe it's reasonably secure. Another problem in morphology, this is the extreme north end of the main lead. As you see, the blocks change size radically and are organized in a pattern which is a little unusual for nature. The first evidence of any human artifacts on this site I found in the first major survey in '75. Two of my divers are lifting it here. And here it is on deck. The Brookhaven National Laboratory had a lot of fun with this. They finally said, well, your guess is as good as mine. It was a mixture of sandstone and limestone. And it is a tongue and groove building block of some sort. But it is more complex than that, as you will see in a drawing. As you see at the left side of this drawing, its thickness ranges from 7.6 centimeters to 8 centimeters. So it obviously was mixed and cast into a form. It relates to no known pre-Columbian culture. That's the story I always get with the artifacts I find there, which is negative evidence, but keeps you going. This was the most dramatic find of the first year. It took us several years to work out permission to bring it up. It's a marble block, a kind of stylized head, weighs about 150 pounds. The diver will give you the scale of it. This was just a beachward from the main site. The curious thing about it, in view of our own recent left brain, right brain notions, the right side of it, severely geometric, the left side of it, its own left side, modeled, as if a symbol of left and right brain. This is its left side and its right side. And finally on deck 2 years later. Delivered to the island commissioner and taken to the jail on the island, where it stayed until it was taken to a museum in Nassau. There are geologists who work on this site from time to time trying to debunk even the idea of a man-made site, of course. Some of their arguments are based on core samples. I have personally witnessed the taking of core samples by other people on this island. And I saw in all cases that using a short drill and a hydraulic handheld drill, that they wobbled all around. And so conclusions from the angle of attack would be faulty. So with my expedition one year, we built a tripod on the island to keep the drill straight. We drilled 80-millimeter cores. The supervising geologist was Florida Atlantic University, Dr. Lemon. This is one of the critics of the site, Eugene Shin's core, and I forget his exact argument, but it depended on the angle of attack of the bedding planes, and I've just explained why I find his argument invalid, because I saw the cores drilled without any bracing to assure a vertical attack. Many of these large blocks are resting on smaller stones underneath, which takes us off in the direction of megalithic sites in Europe and in America, but that's not my topic this evening. Frequently you find that arrangement, however. Even with the larger stones, 3 by 4 meters, you'll find 20, 30, 40 centimeter blocks underneath them. This is a key point in the survey, the square stone, and it is 3 by 4 meters, and you can see how the joints come in at right angles from all directions. Once again, beach rock has its main joints perpendicular to the beach, period. Harold Edgerton, who invented side-scan sonar, agreed to do a survey for me one year. And I won't go into the results except to say that for 4 miles we found rectilinear and square corners, shapes at about 20 feet. Our position control was radar, and we used a fathometer. I have that all on strip charts. When sufficient funding is available, there's much to do there. 4 miles of targets. He was a great sport at sea. He was 71 at the time, and he and I ran the galley. Our 30-year-olds weren't up to it. Now this is another problem out there. In the Cayce readings, there's talk about a healing spring. This is a gamma counter I have in my hands. I have a waterproof probe, and I got about twice the background count there, even on gamma. I swam that thing for an hour on compressed air. I had very painful bursitis in my left shoulder. That was 1975. I've had no recurrence of it. What I suspect is, of course, that as you know, you don't measure radon that way. I suspect that we did have high energy there. I suspect that we'll have to do the radon measurement. As you know, Hot Springs, Arkansas has radon in the water, and the healing spas in Europe have radon in their water. It seems, on a short-term basis, it seems to be healing. Geologists say that the Bahamas are extremely stable, that there has never been any seismic activity there. As you see here, for about 8 miles, we have a displacement vertically of about 14 feet. That was Defense Mapping Agency data, by the way. I've had official cooperation with the Navy and the Defense Mapping Agency. In fact, this last one, the chap to the right is a UDT chap, and I had official cooperation and 4 SEALs and 1 UDT diver with me on the last trip. And it was a very productive trip. 24-year-old Annapolis graduate who we towed for 4 hours with sharks following him in a survey of one area, and we asked him afterwards, "Did you notice the sharks?" He said, "Yeah, sure." That's what I need out in the field. He kept on the job without worrying about it. The person in the center was the executive officer. He was a lieutenant, and he was the discoverer of the artifact that I will show you. This block is probably the most intriguing artifact that we've found, as you will see from the dimensions. One of the Navy people made a joke at first, said, "Well, it's just the side of a concrete block." Again, it's a mixture of sandstone and limestone, and you see its approximate length. And you see that its sides are not parallel. And you see here, if that's in focus enough for you, that it has a 6mm drill hole and an 8mm drill hole, among other anomalies. This has been to the best Mesoamerican archaeologists at the American Museum of Natural History. And both of them said that it was a human artifact, but again, not related to any known culture, that it was a piece of work stone. Now, this is my biggest joke for the establishment. This block we left in place because it was too heavy for us to lift. It was about 200 pounds. But we didn't have permission to remove it either. As you will notice, all of its dimensions are divisible by 10 centimeters. I couldn't believe it. I sketched it on a pad underwater and measured it, then remeasured it, then remeasured it, because I couldn't believe that kind of a coincidence. Every measurement divisible by 10 centimeters. This is the Calypso. I was asked to explain the site to them. You've probably seen the tape, Calypso Search for Atlantis. And that was about 2 years before Philippe's death. This airplane he crashed in Spain. Now we have a problem which is worse than any that I've intimated before. I'll flip through so you can see the three. You see the patterns of light around it. Focused vertically in this last one, flaring from the base here, and more broadly here. That is approximately 2 meters high. It was photographed by North Carolina chiropractor Dr. William Bell in 1957. He let me publish those photos in the Stones of Atlantis. One of the NASA physicists in my club in New York, the Explorers Club, looked at these slides and said, I don't think that it is gamma, but he said there is no way that we could identify what it is without instrumentation on the site. It is some kind of radiation. That was his opinion. Pulsing. Now, I have looked for it with infrared, ultraviolet, and heat sensing technology. Very sensitive heat sensing, down to 1/4 degree Fahrenheit. I have been over the entire area where Dr. Bell located it by coordinates. I've been over it many times. It has either been removed or what else I don't know, because it's a hard limestone seafloor and we always see that, so we can't think that it's under sand. I have no explanation, but along earthquake fault lines we're looking at geomagnetic anomalies and gravitational anomalies, and we're looking at psychoactive effects of those anomalies. And then I began from that project thinking about, back to this one, that perhaps this was some kind of electromagnetic anomaly being focused by this column. I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Well, that's the end of our slideshow. Well, I thank you for your presence and hope you had a little fun with it.
You have as much information now as anyone in the world about the underwater structures in the Bahamas. For the last 100 years, the archaeological establishment has claimed that Atlantis was a myth, a fiction dreamed up by Plato, and that these underwater structures in the Bahamas are natural formations. They claim that the above-water megalithic sites in the United States were built by colonial farmers during the past 200 years. After seeing the evidence, we can now make our own judgments about whether these claims are true or false. The time has come for us to learn the truth about the megalith builders. because they experienced one of the greatest natural disasters to happen to our Earth. They left monuments, graves, and some oral traditions handed down through the generations that can tell us what happened to them and how they became lost to world history. They survive in all of us, their descendants, and we owe it to them and to ourselves to recover their story. I'm Jean Hunt for Hunt Associates.